May 12, 1968. Bien Hoa Province, South Vietnam. Australian gunners dig weapon pits in a rubber plantation 40 kilometers northeast of Saigon, unaware that hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers are watching them from the tree line. Before dawn, those same gunners will fight the most intense artillery battle in Australian history. And if you want to discover the untold stories of courage, sacrifice, and tactical brilliance from the Vietnam War, hit that subscribe button now for Vietnam War Records, because we bring you the real history that deserves to be remembered. The air is thick, not just with humidity, though the Vietnamese heat clings to skin like wet cloth, but with something else. Tension. The kind soldiers feel in their bones before they can explain why. Lieutenant Ian Ahern kneels beside a circular pit, freshly carved into the red earth, running his fingers along the smooth edges. Around him, scattered through the rubber trees, 97 more identical fighting positions. Empty. But not for long. He picks up a rifle cartridge, 7.62mm, Soviet-made. Standard issue for the AK-47. Next to it, a candy wrapper bearing Ho Chi Minh's face. The wrapper is clean. No rain damage. No sun fade. It was dropped recently, maybe yesterday, maybe this morning. Ahern looks at Second Lieutenant Bob Lowry. Neither man speaks. They don't need to. Both know what 100 freshly dug weapon pits mean. A company-sized element. Perhaps larger, disciplined, organized. Professional soldiers, not ragged guerrillas. These are North Vietnamese Army regulars. And they're right here, in this exact spot where 102 Field Battery, Royal Australian Artillery, is now setting up 6 105mm howitzers. Ahern reports the discovery to Major Brian Murtaugh, the officer responsible for the base defense. Murtaugh acknowledges, but the information goes no further. No warning is issued. No defensive posture changed. The artillery crews continue their work, unaware that their presence has already been noted by an enemy that never left. This is the beginning of the Battle of Coral-Balmoral. 26 days of sustained combat, the longest, bloodiest battle Australian forces will fight in the entire Vietnam War. Before it ends, Australian and New Zealand artillery batteries will fire more than 30,000 rounds. That number is almost incomprehensible. 30,000 shells, each one weighing 33 pounds, each requiring manual loading, aiming, firing, 30,000 times the thunder of high explosive tearing through jungle canopy. 30,000 missions calculated under pressure, under fire, under the constant threat of being overrun by an enemy that operates in the dark with ruthless efficiency. But the artillery crews don't know this yet. Right now, on this humid afternoon of May 12th, they're just trying to dig deep enough to survive the night, and they have no idea how deep they'll need to go. To understand what happens at Coral, you must first understand what brought Australian forces to this remote rubber plantation in the first place. The date is significant. May 1968. 3 months after the Tet Offensive shattered American confidence and proved the war was far from won, in late January, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched coordinated attacks across South Vietnam, striking over 100 cities and military installations simultaneously. The offensive was repulsed. Enemy casualties were catastrophic, but the psychological impact on the United States was profound. The enemy was supposed to be broken. Tet proved otherwise. Now in May, intelligence reports suggest the North Vietnamese are preparing a second wave. A mini-Tet. Saigon, the capital, is the primary target. On May 5th, NVA forces strike the city. The attack is fierce, but ultimately unsuccessful. American and South Vietnamese forces repel the assault. As enemy units withdraw northward from Saigon, Allied commanders see an opportunity. Intercept the withdrawal. Cut off retreat routes. Destroy enemy forces before they can regroup and refit in their Cambodian sanctuaries. This is the genesis of Operation Tone Thang. Complete victory. 70,000 troops. American, South Vietnamese, Australian, New Zealand, Thai. The largest combined operation of the war. And into this massive deployment, the 1st Australian Task Force is inserted. Their normal area of operations is Phuoc Tue Province, south of Saigon, where they've spent 2 years conducting counterinsurgency operations against local Viet Cong forces. Now they're moving north, into Bien Hoa Province, into the approaches to Saigon, into the withdrawal routes of a North Vietnamese division. But there's a problem. The intelligence is wrong, catastrophically wrong. The briefings given to Australian commanders describe enemy forces as demoralized, broken, withdrawing in small groups with low morale. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Bennett, commanding officer of the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, receives these assessments. So does Lieutenant Colonel Shelton of the 3rd Battalion. Both men will later state unequivocally that the intelligence they received bore no resemblance to the reality they encountered. The enemy is not withdrawing. The enemy is not demoralized. The 7th Division North Vietnamese Army is moving towards Saigon, not away from it. And the Australians are about to land directly in their path. May 12. Dawn. The air assault begins. Helicopters thunder across the sky, rotors beating the humid air into submission. The plan is straightforward. Establish fire support base Coral at grid reference XT925284. 2 Australian infantry battalions will operate from this base, patrolling aggressively to find and fix enemy forces. Artillery will provide fire support. The fire support base itself will be defended by D Company, 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, while the guns are manned by 102 Field Battery and 161 Field Battery of the Royal New Zealand Artillery. On paper, it's a solid plan. In execution, it becomes a disaster. The first problem in written orders never reach subordinate units. The entire operation proceeds on. In military operations, this is dangerous. Written orders, they ensure everyone understands the mission, the enemy situation, the coordinated actions. Without them, confusion is inevitable. And confusion in combat. The second problem is navigation. The regimental reconnaissance party, led by Major Brian Murtaugh, is supposed to land at Cape Ard, the designated landing zone, and immediately begin laying out the battery positions. Fire support bases require careful planning. Guns must be positioned for mutual support. Infantry positions must interlock. Fields of fire must be cleared. Defensive barriers erected. It's a complex coordination requiring hours of preparation, but when Murtaugh's party lands, they immediately disappear. Radio contact is lost. Lieutenant Ian Ahern, the gun position officer for 102 Battery, lands minutes later expecting to find Murtaugh and receive instructions. Instead, he finds American infantry from the 1st Division and the sound of airstrikes to the west. No Australian officers, no orders, no plan. Chaos multiplies. The New Zealand battery's guns arrive early. Not at 1,000 hours as the sky fills with Chinook helicopters carrying 6 105mm howitzers. Each gun weighs over 2 tons. Each must be carefully positioned and surveyed to ensure accurate fire. But there's no one to tell the pilots where to put them. No designated battery area, no coordination. The helicopters can't wait. They have other missions. Lieutenant Rod Baldwin, the New Zealand gun position officer, sprints across the landing zone, laying out gun markers wherever he can find space. The guns land, the helicopters depart, and the New Zealanders find themselves 1,500 meters away from where the Australian battery will eventually set up, 1,500 meters. In military terms, this is catastrophic. Standard doctrine calls for batteries to be within 400 meters of each other for mutual support. 1,500 meters means if one battery is attacked, the other cannot provide effective defensive fire, cannot reinforce, cannot coordinate. They are, for all practical purposes, 2 separate fire support bases, and both are vulnerable. When Ahern finally re-establishes radio contact with Murtaugh, the order is vague: move to my location. Just up the track, Ahern requests a smoke grenade to identify Murtaugh's position. The colored smoke pops. Ahern takes a compass bearing. He and his small party march into the rubber plantation. When they find Murtaugh, he's over a kilometer from the landing zone. Ahern is deeply concerned. He points out the enormous gap between the 2 batteries. Murtaugh is unmoved. He insists the space is needed for the deploying task force. Ahern has no authority to countermand, so 102 Battery will set up here, isolated, separated, exposed. As Ahern and his survey team move through the rubber to fix an accurate grid reference for the gun position, they make the discovery. The weapon pits. Nearly 100 of them. Circular. Professional. Recently dug. And the evidence. AK-47 rounds. Vietnamese candy wrappers. Signs of a large military force that occupied this exact ground within the last 24 hours. Ahern reports it, but the information is not disseminated. The infantry companies deploying through the battery area are not warned. The battalion commanders are not alerted. the critical intelligence that an enemy force is operating in immediate proximity to the fire support base dies with Murtaugh's acknowledgement. Throughout the afternoon, the deployment continues. Helicopters, ferry and gun crews, ammunition, equipment, the 6 guns of 102 battery arrive. Each must be manhandled into position, then surveyed, then registered on reference points to ensure accuracy. It's exhausting work in the Vietnamese heat, but the crews push through. They know the infantry companies need fire support. Already, elements of 1st and 3rd battalions are patrolling kilometers away. If they make contact, the guns must be ready. But the guns are not the only priority. Defense is equally critical. Fire support bases are magnets for enemy attacks. Artillery is the single most effective killer on the battlefield. Enemy forces know this. They target guns aggressively. So, defensive preparations are essential. Protective earth bunds around each gun, barbed wire barriers, claymore mines, interlocking fields of fire, coordinated defensive plans. None of this happens at Coral. The defense stores arrive late. The bulldozer arrives late. There's no time to erect wire before D Company, 3rd Battalion, the unit designated for base defense, is positioned so far away that they cannot support the guns. Nobody knows exactly where they are. No coordination meeting is held. No defensive plan is distributed. As the sun sets on May 12th, Fire Support Base Coral is a collection of guns, infantry, and supporting elements scattered across a rubber plantation with no cohesive defense. But one decision is made that will save lives. The gun crews are ordered to dig weapon pits, not the shallow scrapes soldiers sometimes create for minimal cover, but proper fighting positions. Stage 1 depth, 4 feet down. The crews hate it. Digging in the Vietnamese heat is miserable. They'd rather set up the command post, organize ammunition, prepare the guns. But the order stands. Dig. And they do. By last light, most of 102 battery has dug weapon pits deep enough to provide real protection. It's exhausting, unpopular work, but in a few hours, those pits will be the difference between life and death. As darkness falls, the battery settles into routine. Stand to. The nightly ritual where all personnel watch their sectors, weapons ready, senses alert. Stand to typically lasts 30 minutes, then stand down. Half the crews sleep, half remain on watch. The gun detachments clean the guns after the registration shoots conducted at dusk. Coffee is brewed, cigarettes smoked. Some men sleep, others talk quietly. The sentries on the machine guns scan and the darkness stares back. The 1st Battalion companies are deployed in ambush positions scattered across the operational area. These are small units, 30 to 40 men, positioned astride likely enemy approach routes. Their mission is to detect and disrupt enemy movement. At 18:09 hours, D Company reports contact. A brief: 1 North Vietnamese soldier killed, 1 Australian wounded. At 19:36 hours, B Company fires at an enemy party. No result. Then the signal flares. Red flares fired into the night sky, answered by other red flares from different locations. The enemy is caught communicating, moving. The sentries at 102 battery see green tracer fire arcing vertically into the darkness. Green tracer, not red. Red is allied. Green is enemy. The North Vietnamese are out there, close. At midnight, the tension spikes. The mortar platoon machine gun opens fire on 3 North Vietnamese soldiers moving at the edge of the perimeter. An enemy machine gun returns fire. Green tracer snaps overhead. The regimental command post accuses the mortar platoon of firing at them. Lieutenant Tony Jensen, the mortar line officer, responds coldly over the radio. "We only have red tracer. That's green. That's them." Stand to is ordered again. Everyone up, weapons ready, eyes straining into the blackness. Minutes pass. Nothing. Stand down is called. Most of the gunners return to their weapon pits and sleep. The sentries remain, watching, waiting. 2,000 meters north of Fire Support Base Coral, 12 platoon of D Company 1st Battalion lies in ambush. 32 men, hidden in the vegetation. Silent. Waiting. At 0215 hours, the platoon machine gunner sees movement, a large formation, moving southwest, toward Coral. The machine gun opens fire. Red tracer lances into the darkness. For 3 seconds, the Australians have the initiative. Then the world explodes. Rocket-propelled grenades, dozens of them, fired from the tree line. The RPGs airburst in the canopy above 12 platoon. Shrapnel sides downward. In seconds, 11 Australian soldiers are casualties. Wound bleeding. The platoon is combat ineffective. Forward observer Gordon Alexander. His voice is controlled, professional. Despite the chaos around him, despite the blood and the screaming and the knowledge that his company is being torn apart, contact. Contact. Fire mission battery. The call is received at 1-2 battery. The command post erupts into action. The tannoy system Contact. Contact. Fire mission battery. Gunners tumble from their weapon pits. 6 crews sprint to their guns. The howitzers are manhandled around, pointed north. Fire orders are shouted. Projectiles loaded. Breeches slammed shut. Lanyards pulled. The guns roar. 6 105mm shells arc into the night. 20 kilometers away in 3 seconds. Impacting in the jungle, the crews reload, fire again and again. For 20 minutes, the guns hammer the target area, supporting D Company, suppressing the enemy, buying time for the wounded to be evacuated. Finally, the call, end of mission. The guns fall silent. Battery Commander Major Gavin Andrews calls for the gun position officer. Lieutenant Ahern reports to the command post. Andrews is worried. The enemy is active, aggressive, close. He asks Ahern a critical question. Can the battery maintain 2 final protective fire tasks? 2 FPFs, 2 separate targets, pre-registered, preloaded, ready to fire instantly if Australian infantry is attacked. Ahern considers. It's unusual. Splitting the battery reduces flexibility, but it's possible. Guns 2 and 3 will cover the eastern sector. B Company. Guns 4, 5, and 6 will cover the north. D Company. Andrews approves. The decision is made. Guns are laid on the FPF targets. Projectiles loaded, charges set, ready. This decision, made in the aftermath of one firefight, will determine the outcome of the next. The gun crews clean up. Brass casings, powder residue, packing material. The platforms around each gun are swept clear. Most of the gunners return to their weapons. Sleep is essential. Combat exhaustion is, but the crew of Gun 4 decides differently. They've had enough sleep. They stay up. Coffee, cigarettes, conversation, just sitting around their gun, staying awake. This casual decision, made for no particular reason, will save their lives and the lives of every man at Fire Support Base Coral. At 0230 hours, the world ends. Rocket-propelled grenades shriek out of the darkness. Dozens of them, scores of them, fired from multiple positions simultaneously. Mortar machine gun fire rakes the perimeter. The attack is not probing, not harassing. This is a coordinated ground assault by a battalion-sized North Vietnamese force. Over 500 soldiers, professional, disciplined, attacking under cover of darkness with the intent to overrun the Australian guns and kill every man defending them. Gunners Mick Grimes and John Schwartze manned the M60 machine gun positioned in front of Gun 6 on the right flank. They watched the tree line. Muzzle flashes wink in the darkness. RPGs streak overhead, trailing smoke. Then the enemy in Grimes will later describe what he sees in words that still carry the shock of that moment. Massed ranks of infantry just stood up and came forward. Not individuals, not small groups. Massed ranks, shoulder to shoulder, advancing like soldiers on a parade ground. Except they're 150 meters away. And, closing, Grimes and Schwartze open fire. The M60 machine gun hammer. Red Tracer pours into the advancing North Vietnamese. Men fall, but the attack doesn't falter. More soldiers step over the bodies and continue. The machine gun jams. Grimes clears it, fires again. The gun jams a second time, clears, fires, jams a third time. There's no time to clear it again. The enemy is on them. Grimes and Schwartz abandon the machine gun and fall back to the North Vietnamese soldiers climb the protective earth bund. Hand-to-hand Grimes fires his self-loading rifle. An NVA soldier fires back. The burst of AK-47 fire hits Grimes' rifle. The weapon of Grimes' hand is wounded, but he's alive. If the rifle hadn't been in the way, the burst would have stitched across his chest. Fatal. Section Commander 2nd Lieutenant Matt Cleland arrives at Gun 6. He empties his pistol into the North Vietnamese soldiers on the bund, sprints back to his weapon pit, grabs his F1 submachine gun, returns to the fight. The Australians are outnumbered, outgunned. The North Vietnamese throw grenades. The Australian gunners have no grenades to throw back. Doctrine prohibits it. An Australian officer was killed by a grenade accident at Nui Dat. After that, grenades could only be issued with command approval. There's no Gun Sergeant Max Franklin makes a command decision. Fall back. The crew abandons Gun 6 and retreats to Gun 5. Franklin takes the howitzer's firing pin with him. Without it, the gun cannot fire. If the enemy captures the weapon, it's useless. Franklin doesn't tell anyone he took the pin. This will cause confusion later. But right now, it's the right decision. At Gun 4 on the left, they see the RPGs, hear the machine gun fire, watch the mortar rounds impact, and they react instantly. Personal weapons, SLRs, M16s. They open fire into the advancing North Vietnamese. The enemy less than 100 meters. The protective earth bund that the bulldozer completed just hours earlier provides cover. The gun crew fires from behind the bund. Disciplined, controlled, devastating. The North Vietnamese attack falters. Soldiers go to ground. Return fire, but they cannot advance. Gun 4 holds. Between Gun 4 and Gun 6, the command post is under fire. The regimental command post, the 102 battery command post, the mortar platoon, all taking RPGs, mortars, and machine gun fire, trying to maintain communications, trying to coordinate fire missions. Because even as the base is underground assault, the guns must continue to support the infantry companies deployed elsewhere. This is the nightmare scenario. Defend your position while simultaneously firing missions for units kilometers away. It requires discipline, training, professionalism, and courage. Lieutenant Tony Jensen commands the mortar platoon. His mortars are positioned 50 meters north of Gun 4, close enough to support, close enough to share the attack. His crews are fighting as infantry, rifles, machine guns, and trying to man their mortars, trying to fire support missions. Jensen receives a radio call. D Company Forward Observer, Gordon Alexander, the same officer who called the fire mission. Alexander's voice is calm, professional. 1-4. Fire mission battery. Jensen's response is immediate. This call sign underground assault. There's a pause. Then Alexander's voice. Flat. Resigned. Oh. That single word carries the weight of understanding. The artillery cannot help. The guns are fighting for survival. D Company is on its own. But the guns do not stop. Even as gun crews fight with rifles, the howitzers continue firing. Fire Direction Center personnel calculate missions, relay firing data. Guns are laid, loaded, fired. All while RPGs explode around them. All while enemy machine gun fire tears through the position. All while North Vietnamese infantry probe the perimeter, looking for weak points. This is not in the training manual. This is not doctrine. This is adaptation under fire. And it works. Gun 6 is recaptured. Australian infantry from the nearby head. The North Vietnamese are driven off the gun platform. The weapon is secure, but it's damaged. Inspection will have to wait for daylight. Gun 5 continues firing. Guns 1, 2, and 3 continue firing missions for B Company to the east. Gun 4 holds the left flank. The mortars fire illumination rounds. Flares burst overhead. White light floods the battlefield. The North Vietnamese are exposed. Australian riflemen cut them down. The enemy attack loses. The North Vietnamese pull back, regroup. The firing slackens, then stops. The assault is over. For now. Dawn. The sun rises over fire support base Coral, revealing a scene of carnage. North Vietnamese bodies are scattered across the perimeter. 52 confirmed dead. Some are within meters of the Australian gun positions. Some are on the protective bunds. Some are tangled in the sparse wire that was partially erected before darkness. Australian patrols move cautiously beyond the perimeter. They find more, drag them in for identification. Intelligence officers photograph the dead, check for documents, unit patches, anything that identifies the enemy force. The bodies tell a story. These are not Viet Cong guerrillas. These are North Vietnamese Army regulars. Uniforms, web gear, modern weapons. The dead carry AK-47 rifles, RPG launchers, Chinese stick grenades, machine guns. This was a professional military assault, coordinated, supported, executed by soldiers who knew their trade. And they were stopped, not by overwhelming firepower, not by air support, not by tanks or helicopter gunships. They were stopped by a handful of artillery crews who fought with rifles and courage and refused to abandon their guns. The Australian casualties are serious. 9 killed, 28 wounded, 1 howitzer damaged, 2 mortars damaged, For a single night's fighting, these are heavy losses, but they could have been worse. Much worse. If the gun crews hadn't dug deep weapon pits, the casualty count would be doubled. If Gun 4's crew had been asleep, the left flank would have collapsed. If the command post had been overrun, communications would have been lost and the entire position would have fallen. The battle was won by small decisions made by individual soldiers and by luck. The luck of hard training, the luck of good leadership, the luck of men who stayed awake when they should have slept. But the battle is not over. It has barely begun. The North Vietnamese do not give up. They do not withdraw in defeat. They regroup, reinforce, prepare for the next attack. Intelligence reports start coming in. Prisoner interrogations, radio intercepts, captured documents. The enemy force is larger than anyone suspected. The 7th Division, multiple regiments, thousands of soldiers, and fire support base Coral sits directly in their operational area. The Australians are not blocking a withdrawal. They're blocking a reinforcement route. The North Vietnamese are trying to move south to attack Saigon, and the Australians are in the way. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeats. Enemy probes, sapper attacks, mortar barrages. On May 16th, another major assault. This time, the Australians are ready. Defensive wire is up. Claymores are emplaced. Fields of fire are cleared. The attack is beaten back with heavy enemy casualties. The artillery fires thousands of rounds, not just at the attacking force, but at enemy staging areas, suspected mortar positions, withdrawal routes. The guns work day and night. Fire missions blur together. Calculate, load, fire, adjust, fire again. Crews rotate, sleep when they can, eat cold rations, drink warm water, and fire, always firing. The infantry companies continue patrolling, aggressive, constant. They find enemy bunker complexes, supply caches, trails marked with signs indicating unit boundaries. The North Vietnam, they're operating openly, and they're strong. Company-sized elements engage Australian platoons. The fighting is brutal. The jungle canopy negates air support. Artillery is the only help, and the guns answer every call. Forward observers with the infantry companies call coordinates. The guns fire, rounds impact within minutes, sometimes within a minute. The infantry learns to trust the artillery absolute. When the shells come in, they come in close. Danger close. Within 100 meters, within 50 meters. The Australian gunners are that good. On May 24th, the decision is made to establish a second fire support base. Fire Support Base Balmoral, 4 kilometers northwest of Coral. The purpose is to extend artillery coverage and reduce overcrowding at Coral. Elements of the task force move to Balmoral, set up guns, establish defenses. The North Vietnamese watch, wait, then attack. May 26th, 0345 hours. The 141st Regiment North Vietnamese Army assaults Fire Support Base Balmoral. The attack is massive, heavier than the first assault on Coral. Mortars, rockets, RPGs, machine guns, then the infantry. Hundreds of soldiers advancing in coordinated waves, but this time the artillery is ready. The guns at Balmoral, the guns at Coral fire in support. American artillery from nearby helicopter gunships circle overhead. The combined firepower is staggered. High explosive shells blanket the enemy assault force. The attack breaks. The North Vietnamese withdraw. Bodies are counted at dawn. Dozens. The enemy tried. The enemy failed. But they try again. May 28, 0230 hours. The 165th Regiment North Vietnamese Army, full strength. Estimated 1,500 to 2,500 soldiers. The largest assault of the entire battle. They hit Balmoral with This is not a raid. This is an attempt to annihilate the Australian, to kill every man, capture every gun, erase the obstacle blocking their route to Saigon. The Australian gun, they've been ready since the first attack. The guns are bunkered, ammunition is stacked, fire plans are prepared. When the attack comes, the response is instant. 6 guns, then the guns at Coral join in, then American 155mm howitzers, then 8-inch howitzers. The artillery concentration is overwhelming. Shells fall across the enemy assembly areas, across the approach, across the objective. High explosive, white phosphorus, variable time fuses that airburst above the ground. The killing zone is total. The North Vietnamese infantry advances anyway into the storm of steel. Men fall in rows, but others keep coming. Disciplined, determined. They reach the wire. Bangalore torpedoes blast gaps. Sappers rush through. They're met by Australian infantry firing from bunkers, machine guns, rifles. The attackers go to ground. Return fire. For hours the battle rages. The gun crews fire continues. Not just indirect missions, direct fire. The howitzers are depressed, aimed at the wire, loaded with beehive rounds, flechette projectiles. Each shell contains thousands of small steel darts. When fired, the round becomes a giant shotgun. The darts shred everything in their path. The North Vietnamese assault. By dawn, the ground in front of Balmoral is carpeted with bodies. The statistics are staggering. In that single night, the artillery fires over 3,000 rounds, from midnight to dawn. That's an average of 10 rounds per minute per gun for 6 hours straight. The gun crews work in continuous rotation. Loading, firing, resupplying, no breaks, no rest. Just load and fire. Load and fire. The physical exhaustion is crushing. Each projectile weighs 30 tons. Each must be lifted from the ammunition pile, carried to the gun, loaded into the breech. The powder charges must be selected at the fuses set, the breeches closed, the lanyards pulled, then the recoil, the noise, the heat, and the process begins again. The gun barrels glow red in the dust. The heat is so intense that powder charges ignite prematurely if they touch the breech. Crews learn to wait. Let the barrel cool slightly, then load quickly, fire. Wait again. It's a rhythm born of necessity. Too fast and the gun overheats, too slow and the infantry dies. So the crews find the balance, and they maintain it, hour after hour, through the darkness, into the dawn. When the sun rises on May 28th, the Australians count enemy bodies, over 100 confirmed. The actual number is certainly higher. The North Vietnamese drag their dead from the battlefield when they can, but they cannot retrieve them all. Not under this volume of fire, not when every movement draws artillery. The fields in front of Balmoral are impassable. The wounded cry out. Some for hours. The Australians cannot help them. Any movement outside the wire draws fire from enemy positions still occupied in the tree line. Medical evacuation is impossible. The wounded die. Slowly. It's a horror both sides understand. War is not clean. War is not honorable. War is young men bleeding to death in the mud, crying for mothers who cannot hear them. The attacks on Balmoral are the last major assaults. The North Vietnamese have lost. They know it. The 7th Division is shattered. Casualties are catastrophic, not just from the ground assaults, but from the relentless artillery fire that pounds them day and night. Every time they mass for an attack, the shells find them. Every time they establish a mortar position, it's destroyed. Every time they move supplies forward, the trails are interdicted. The Australian artillery has created a killing zone that cannot be crossed. From May 12 to June 6, the artillery batteries at Coral and Balmoral fire over 30,000 rounds, 30,000 shells. The number is almost beyond comprehension. To put it in perspective, the famous Battle of Long Tan in 1966, where 108 Australian infantrymen held off a force of 2,000 Viet Cong, consumed approximately 3,000 artillery rounds in 4 hours. Coral-Balmoral is 10 times that, sustained over 26 days. It's the largest artillery expenditure by Australian forces in the entire Vietnam War. The logistical effort to sustain this rate of fire is staggering. Every shell must be flown in by helicopter, every powder charge, every fuse, every piece of equipment. The helicopters fly day and night, carrying ammunition, evacuating wounded, bringing supplies, under fire. The pilots and crew chiefs of the helicopter unit flying into fire support bases under mortar attack, landing under unloading, taking off, returning for another load. Without them, the guns fall silent. Without the guns, the infantry dies. The gun crews understand their role. They are not glory troops. They do not lead bayonet charges. They do not capture flags or take prisoners in dramatic firefights. They stand behind their guns and they fire, mission after mission after mission. When the infantry is in contact, when the base is under attack, the artillery fires. When enemy movement is detected, they fire until the barrels are so hot they glow. They fire until their shoulders are bruised from the recoil of personal weapons fired during ground assaults. They fire until their hands bleed from handling ammunition. They fire until they can barely stand, and then they fire some more, This is what makes them the North Vietnamese, not because they're invincible, not because they can't be killed, they can. 9 Australian artillerymen die at Coral. 28 are wounded. The guns can be damaged. Gun 6 was nearly captured on the first night, but the gun crews do not run. They do not abandon their weapons. When the North Vietnamese infantry reaches the gun positions, they expect the crews to flee. That's what artillerymen are supposed to do. Artillery is a rear air. Gunners are not supposed to fight as infantry, but the Australians do. They fight with rifles and machine guns and whatever weapons they can grab. They fight in the weapon pits. They fight until the enemy is driven back or killed, and then they return to their guns and continue firing. The North Vietnamese learned this the hard way. Captured prisoners and post-war accounts reveal enemy assessments of Australian forces. They distinguish between American and Australian tactics. American forces, in the North Vietnamese view, rely on firepower and technology. They call in airstrikes, artillery, helicopter gunships. They fight from a distance. Australian forces are different. Australians patrol aggressively. They trek. They ambush. They fight at close range, and their artillery doesn't run. This last point appears repeatedly in North Vietnamese accounts. The artillery doesn't run. It's unexpected. It's unprecedented, and it's terrifying. Senior Colonel Nguyen Van Linh, political officer of the 7th NVA Division, will later describe Coral-Balmoral as a strategic setback. The Australian artillery created a wall of fire we could not penetrate. Our casualties were severe. The operation was not successful. This is measured language from a military officer describing what was, for the North Vietnamese, a disaster. The 7th Division is rendered combat ineffective. It withdraws to months will pass before it can return to operations. The planned reinforcement of Saigon attacks is abandoned. The Mini-Tet offensive falters. And a significant part of the reason is 30,000 artillery shells fired by Australian and New Zealand gun crews who refuse to quit. But the victory comes at a cost. 25 Australians die during the Battle of Coral-Balmoral. 99 are wounded. For a force of approximately 2,000 men, these are significant casualties. Every death is mourned. Every name is remembered. The Australian War Memorial in Canberra lists. The 102 Field Battery Association remembers them. The families remember them. These are not statistics. They are sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. Men who went to Vietnam because their country asked them to. Men who did their duty. Men who died doing it. The wounded carry their scars. Physical scars. Shrapnel wounds. Gunshot wounds. Burns. But also psychological scars. Well, in 1968, post-traumatic stress disorder is not recognized. The term doesn't exist. Soldiers are expected to absorb the horror, move on, get back to work. Many do, many function. But the nightmares remain. The hypervigilance. The sudden panic at loud noises. The inability to sleep. The anger. The isolation. Decades will pass before society understands the cost of combat trauma. By then, many Coral-Balmoral veterans have struggled for years. Unsupported. Suffering in silence. Because that's what soldiers. The battle also exposes serious problems in command and intelligence. The initial intelligence assessment that enemy forces were demoralized and withdrawing was catastrophically wrong. This failure nearly costs lives on the first night. The decision to position the two batteries 1,500 meters apart violates basic tactical doctrine and creates unnecessary vulnerability. The absence of written orders causes confusion during deployment. The failure to conduct a defensive coordination meeting on the first night leaves units unsure of their responsibilities and positions. These are not trivial issues. These are fundamental failures that could have resulted in the complete destruction of fire support base Coral. That they did not is due to the junior leaders and individual soldiers who adapted, improvised, and fought with courage and skill. Lieutenant Ian A. Hearn, Second Lieutenant Bob Lowry, Lieutenant Tony Jensen, Gunners Mick Grimes and John Schwartzy, Gun Sergeant Max Franklin, Section Commander Matt Cleland, Battery Commander Gavin Andrews, Forward Observer Gordon Alexander. These men, and dozens of others like them, made decisions under fire that saved lives and won battles. They received little recognition at the time. The battle was overshadowed by larger American operations. Media attention was focused elsewhere. Australia was growing weary of the Vietnam War. Public support was eroding. Coral-Balmoral was just another battle in a war that seemed to have no end. But within the Australian military, the battle is studied. The lessons are clear. Fire support bases require proper intelligence, proper planning, proper defensive coordination. Artillery units must train for self-defense. Gun crews must be prepared to fight as infantry if necessary. Fire discipline and accuracy are more important than volume of fire. Aggressive patrolling provides early warning and disrupts enemy attack preparations. These lessons are incorporated into doctrine. Training is modified. The Australian Army learns, improves. 40 years later, in 2008, the 40th anniversary of Coral-Balmoral is commemorated. Veterans gather. They are old men now, grandfathers. Some walk with canes. Some are in wheelchairs, but they remember. They remember the heat, the exhaustion, the weight of 33-pound projectiles loaded thousands of times, the roar of guns firing in the darkness, the faces of friends who they remember because forgetting would dishonor the dead. And so they gather. They tell their stories. They ensure the next generation knows what happened in a rubber plantation 40 kilometers northeast of Saigon in May 1968. 50 years later, in 2018, the commemorations are larger. Public awareness has grown. The Vietnam War is history now. No longer a political controversy, but a historical event to be studied and understood. Documentaries are produced. Books are written. Academic studies are published. And the veterans, fewer now, they are very old. Some have died. But those who remain still remember, still tell their stories, still honor their mates. The North Vietnamese remember too. Vietnamese military historians describe Coral-Balmoral in their official histories. They acknowledge the defeat. They recognize the effectiveness of Australian tactics. They admit the casualties were severe and the objectives were not achieved. This is significant. Military histories are often sanitized. Defeats are minimized or reframed as strategic victories. But the Vietnamese accounts of Coral-Balmoral are candid. The Australian artillery was devastating. The 7th Division was stopped. The operation failed. This mutual recognition from both sides validates the historical significance of the battle. Coral-Balmoral was not a minor skirmish. It was not an inconsequential engagement. It was a sustained, intense battle between professional military forces where the outcome had strategic consequences. The Australian and New Zealand artillery crews performed at an extraordinary level. They fired 30,000 rounds under combat conditions. They defended their positions against ground assaults. They supported infantry operations across a wide area. They sustained casualties and continued operations. They adapted to circumstances far outside their training and doctrine. And they won. This is why the title of this documentary is accurate. Australian artillery crews stopped the North Vietnamese Army's worst nightmare, not because the NVA was afraid of Australians specifically, but because the combination of accurate, sustained artillery fire and crews willing to defend their guns created a tactical situation the North Vietnamese could not overcome. Every attack failed. Every assault was repulsed. Every attempt to silence the guns ended in heavy casualties and withdrawal. From the North Vietnamese perspective, this was indeed a nightmare. An obstacle that could not be bypassed, an enemy that could not be defeated, a killing zone that could not be. The 30,000 rounds are the statistical evidence, but the real story is the men who fired those rounds. Young men, most in their early 20s, far from home, fighting in a war that was unpopular, enduring conditions that were miserable, facing an enemy that was skilled and determined, and yet they performed. They did their duty. They supported their mates. They held the line. This is not propaganda. This is not nationalistic glorification. This is historical fact, supported by records, testimonies, and accounts from both sides. The guns of 102 Field Battery and 161 Field Battery fired until the barrels were worn smooth. They fired until ammunition stocks were depleted and had to be frantically resupplied. They fired until the crews could barely stand. And then they kept firing, because that's what the mission required, because the infantry needed support, because the enemy had to be, and they were stopped at Balmoral. Across the 26 days of sustained combat in May and June 1968, when fire support base Coral was finally abandoned on June 6, the Australians left behind a battlefield, shell craters, destroyed bunkers, abandoned equipment, and memories. The rubber plantation would never be the same. The trees bore scars, shrapnel embedded in trunks, blast marks, stripped branches, The earth was churned and cratered. The local villagers who had fled during the fighting would return to find their land transformed into a wasteland. Decades would pass before the jungle reclaimed the scars. But the people who lived through the battle would carry those scars forever. This is the legacy of Coral-Balmoral, a battle that should be remembered but often isn't. A story of ordinary soldiers performing extraordinary feats under impossible conditions. A testament to training, leadership, courage, and the refusal to quit, even when every rational calculation says you should. The Australian artillery crews at Coral-Balmoral faced the North Vietnamese Army's best assault forces and stopped them cold. Not with superior numbers, not with overwhelming technology, but with accurate fire, disciplined defense, and the determination to hold the line no matter the cost. 30,000 rounds, 26 days, 25 dead, 99 wounded, 300 plus enemy killed. One North Vietnamese division rendered combat ineffective. But numbers cannot capture the experience, the fear, the exhaustion, the grief, the pride, the bond between men who faced death together and the memory of those who didn't. These things cannot be quantified. They can only be remembered, honored, and passed on to the next generation. So when you hear the phrase, Australian artillery stopped the NVA's worst nightmare, understand what it means. It means young men standing behind howitzers in a Vietnamese rubber plantation firing shell after shell into the darkness. It means gun crews fighting with rifles when the enemy reached their positions. It means forward observers calling fire missions while under attack themselves. It means radio operators maintaining communications while RPGs exploded around them. It means medics treating wounded under fire. It means helicopter pilots flying into hell to bring ammunition and evacuate casualties. It means junior officers making life and death decisions with incomplete information and no time to consult higher command. It means sergeants holding their crews together through exhaustion and fear. It means ordinary men doing extraordinary things because the mission required it and their mates depended on it. This is the story of Coral-Balmoral. This is the story of the Australian artillery in Vietnam. This is the story that deserves to be told, remembered, honored. And if you found value in this documentary, if you learned something about courage and sacrifice and the reality of combat, then do two things. First, subscribe to Vietnam War Records. We bring you the real stories, the documented history, the accounts from those who were there, no politics, just history. Second, share this video. Tell the story. Make sure the next generation knows what happened in May 1968. Make sure the veterans know their service is remembered. Make sure the fallen are honored. The guns of Coral-Balmoral are silent now. The men who manned them are old or gone. The battlefield has been reclaimed by jungle. But the story, and as long as we tell it, as long as we remember, the sacrifice was not in vain. The Australian artillery crews stopped the North Vietnamese Army's worst nightmare. They held the line. They did their duty. They deserve to be remembered. And now you know why.